All right, let's talk about something really interesting. Why is it that our brains seem to be hardwired to remember pictures way, way better than words? Well, the answer, and it's a fascinating one, takes us deep into our evolutionary past.
Okay, let me paint a picture for you. I bet this sounds familiar. You just finished an amazing book, right? You feel totally inspired, maybe even a little bit smarter. But then a week goes by, and what do you actually remember? Just a vague feeling, maybe a couple of random ideas? You try to explain it to a friend, and you just can't. It's so frustrating, isn't it?
Well, I've got some really good news for you. It's not your fault. Seriously. It's not about being lazy, and it's not a sign you have a bad memory. What's really going on here is a huge, fundamental mismatch. A biological mismatch between the ancient brain we're all carrying around and the super text-heavy world we're trying to navigate.
So, let's get into our first section. This mismatch has a name, and it's a pretty powerful one, the curse of words. It just perfectly nails the challenge our brains are up against every single day. You see, here's the thing. Written text, it's a super recent invention in the grand scheme of human history. So to your brain, this ancient piece of hardware that evolved to process sights, sounds, and smells, a page of words is basically just noise. It's like static. It only becomes meaningful and, more importantly, memorable when you actively translate it.
Okay, section 2. To really understand what's going on, we have to look at the hardware we're all running on. And that hardware is the ancient hunter's brain. I mean, look at this timeline. It really puts everything into perspective, doesn't it? For more than 200,000 years, learning and survival were all about visual and spatial information, what you could see, where you were. And then there's text. It's this tiny little 5,000-year-old sliver at the very end. Our brains just haven't had the time to catch up, not even close.
And if we go even deeper, right into the middle of your brain, we find the hippocampus. This is your memory center. But here's the wild part. It didn't evolve to remember facts. It evolved as a navigation system, a GPS. Its job was to build 3D maps of the world, to remember where's the food, who's a threat, and which way is home. It's built for context, for movement, for feelings.
So this really sums up the whole problem, the tale of two brains. Our hunter's brain, the hardware, it's designed to remember scenes, threats, faces, real, tangible stuff. But what do we ask it to do all day? Remember abstract text, lists, data, formulas. We're trying to run this brand new, really complicated software on ancient hardware, and that's exactly why it keeps crashing.
All right, moving on to section 3, the science of visual memory. Because this isn't just some cool evolutionary story. It's backed by some incredible science, both old and new.
And you know, this idea that our memory is visual and spatial, it's not some new discovery from a self-help book. Its power was actually discovered, tragically, over 2,500 years ago by a Greek poet named Simonides.
So the story goes like this. Simonides was at a huge banquet. He steps outside for a moment, and the entire hall collapses behind him. It was a terrible disaster, and the victims were, well, they were unrecognizable. But Simonides could identify every single person. How? He closed his eyes and mentally walked through the room, remembering who was sitting where. It was a profound realization. Memory isn't a list, it's a place.
Okay, let's fast forward a couple thousand years to modern science. We have something called the dual coding theory. Think of it like this. Your brain has two highways for information to travel on. One is for words, the verbal channel. The other is for images, the visual channel.
Now, here's the kicker. When you only use words, you're just using that one verbal highway. But when you combine words with an image, you open up both highways. You're creating two separate paths to that same memory. And what does that do? It skyrockets your recall. It's not a small difference. It's a massive one.
And it gets even cooler. Scientists have actually found concept neurons in our brains. These are specific brain cells that fire up when you see, say, a picture of your best friend. But they do absolutely nothing when you see an abstract formula. It's proof that our brains are wired for characters, for scenes, for experiences, not for raw, abstract data. It's why a good story will always beat a spreadsheet for memorability.
Okay, so we've got the why down. Let's get into the how. Section 4 is all about effective note-taking. How do we actually apply all this cool science to create notes that work with our brain instead of fighting against it?
So, why do most traditional note-taking methods fail? You know, highlighting stuff, copying sentences word for word, it's because they don't change the format. It's just text in, text out. No real translation happens. And here's the secret. Real learning is all about transformation. If you don't change the information from one form to another, your brain basically just shrugs and thinks, guess that wasn't very important.
So here's a really practical 4-step method you can try. When you finish reading a section, first, just boil it down. What's the one key idea? Get it into one sentence. Second, create an image for it, but make it move. Give it some action, because our brains love that. Third, add a little emotional tag. Was it surprising, confusing, exciting? And finally, number 4, place that little scene somewhere in a mental map, like on a shelf in your childhood bedroom. You're turning a fact into an experience.
And this leads to something I like to call the visual Feynman technique. Think about it. When you explain something with words, it's pretty easy to hide your own confusion, to kind of talk around the parts you don't get. But drawing? There's nowhere to hide. If you truly understand something, you can draw a simple picture or a diagram of it. If you can't, it's a huge red flag that your understanding isn't as solid as you thought.
And you know, when you look back, the greatest thinkers in history totally got this. They did it naturally. Da Vinci's notebooks are filled with sketches, not just words. Einstein famously talked about his thought experiments. He saw the ideas in his head long before he had the math for them. They all understood intuitively that real learning and memory is about creating an experience in your mind.
Okay, final section. This all leads to a really big, very modern question. What about AI? In an age where we can just ask a machine to summarize anything for us, does any of this memory stuff even matter anymore?
The answer is a resounding yes. It matters more than ever. Here's the danger with AI. It makes thinking optional, and that's a huge problem for memory. If you just ask an AI to give you the summary, you're outsourcing the most important part of learning, the struggle, the translation, the encoding. Your brain doesn't do any work, so nothing sticks. The key is to use AI as a tool after you've done the work yourself. Use it to check your understanding, to stress test your own visual notes, not to replace the process entirely.
And one last thing, and this is absolutely non-negotiable: sleep. You can do all this incredible work creating these rich visual memories, but if you don't get deep sleep, it's all for nothing. Sleep is when your brain runs its save program. It's when it decides what's important enough to keep. Pulling an all-nighter to study is literally like doing all the work and then just yanking the power cord out of the wall before hitting save. No sleep, no upload.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. Your brain isn't broken. It's not failing you. It's an incredible, ancient piece of technology that's just designed for a totally different world. So the question we should be asking isn't, how can I fix my bad memory? The real question is, am I finally ready to start speaking my brain's native language? The language of pictures, of places, and of powerful experiences.
All right, you know that feeling, right? You just finish an amazing book, you're totally fired up with all these new ideas, but then, like a week goes by and all you've got left is the vibe. You can't really explain any of it clearly. It's so frustrating, isn't it? Well, here's the good news. It's not you. You're not lazy, and your memory isn't broken. The real problem is actually way deeper. It's this fundamental biological mismatch between how our brains are wired to learn and how we force them to learn today. And that brings us to our first big idea here, what some people call the curse of words. Okay, check out these numbers because the scale of this mismatch is just wild. For more than 200,000 years, our brains were evolving to learn from real-world stuff. Movement, emotions, entire scenes. But writing? That's only been a thing for about 5,000 years. Think about that. On an evolutionary timeline, it's like we're trying to run the latest, most complex app on a computer from the Stone Age. So, let's talk about that ancient hardware, the hippocampus. That's the memory center in your brain. And it's not some neat little filing cabinet for facts. No, it evolved to be a navigation system. Its whole job was to remember where things are. Where's the good food? Where's the danger? It thinks in maps, in context, in visual scenes. And this right here is the heart of the problem. To that ancient navigation-obsessed part of your brain, a page of text is, well, it's basically just noise. It's a totally foreign language. Your brain literally has no idea what to do with it, unless you step in and become the translator. So how do we do that? How do we become that translator? Well, that brings us right to our next section, figuring out the brain's native language. So what most of us do is repetition, right? We reread things, we highlight everything, we write summaries. But this is a total trap. All it does is build familiarity, that kind of foggy feeling that you've seen it before. That's not memory. The real key, the right approach, is transformation. You have to actually change the information's format. That's what sends a signal to your brain saying, hey, pay attention, this is important. And there's some really cool science behind this. It's called dual coding theory, and the idea is actually super simple. Your brain basically has two memory channels, one for words and another one for pictures. The secret sauce? You gotta use both of them at the same time. Let's make this crystal clear. When you read the word balloon, you're using just one channel, the verbal one. That's one lonely path back to that memory. But when you see a picture of a balloon, bam! Your brain encodes both the image and the word. You've just created two highways back to that memory, making it so much stronger and way easier to recall later on. And get this isn't some new age productivity hack. This idea is ancient. This quote comes from a Greek poet, Simonides, who was the only survivor of a building collapse. And how did he identify all the victims for their families? Not by their faces, but by remembering exactly where each person was sitting at the table. That just proves it, right? Memory is spatial. Memory is visual. All right, so we get the why. Now let's get to the how. How do we actually do this? Let's break down the practical system, the 4-step transformation method. So here's the playbook. 4 simple steps. Step 1, extract the core meaning. Just ask yourself, if I had to teach this to a friend, what's the one sentence I'd use? Simple. Step 2, create an image with action. Don't just picture a static thing, make it move. Your brain loves motion. Okay, step 3. Add an emotional tag. Make it surprising or funny or even a little tense. Emotion is like glue for memory. And finally, step 4, anchor it spatially. Intentionally place that image somewhere in your mind's eye. Let's really dig into that last step, because this is where the magic happens. You're not just creating a random picture. You're building a whole mental interface. For example, you could decide that everything on the left side of your mental space is a cause, and everything on the right is an effect. Or maybe top is for big abstract ideas and bottom is for real-world examples. You're literally building a map for your thoughts that your brain already knows how to read. Okay, so you've made this awesome mental image. But how do you know it worked? How can you be sure you've truly understood the idea and not just made a pretty picture in your head? This is where a little trick comes in handy. Think of it like a visual Feynman technique. The idea is simple. Explaining verbally can hide confusion. Drawing cannot. It's so true, isn't it? You can talk your way around a topic you don't fully get, but if you try to draw it, there's nowhere to hide. If you can't sketch it out, even with simple stick figures, your understanding is shaky. Drawing forces you to be crystal clear. Now, this all sounds pretty cool in theory, but does it actually work? And are there any traps we need to avoid? That brings us to our last section here, the proof and a warning. What's so wild is that when you look back, some of the greatest minds in history were already doing this. Leonardo da Vinci? He learned by observing and sketching everything. Albert Einstein? He famously said he thought in pictures and feelings first, and then found the words later. Even Ben Franklin did a version of this, constantly rewriting ideas to get them straight in his head. They all knew the secret. Real learning is about creating an experience, not just reading words. Okay, and now for a super important warning for today. AI can be an amazing tool for learning, but it can also be a huge trap. Here's the wrong way to use it. Asking AI to summarize something for you before you've done the work of visualizing it yourself. If you do that, you're just outsourcing the most important step, the actual memory-making part. Here's the right way. Create your own mental image first. Then go to AI and ask it to challenge your image or to give you different metaphors. Use it to stress test what you've built, not to build it for you. And listen, there's one last piece to this puzzle, and it is absolutely critical. Sleep. You can do all this incredible work creating these rich visual memories, but your brain doesn't actually save them until you're in deep sleep. It's that simple. No sleep, no save. Pulling an all-nighter is like writing a masterpiece and then just turning off the computer without hitting save. So when you put it all together, this idea of transforming text into visuals and then locking it in with a good night's sleep, the big takeaway is clear. Real learning isn't about consuming information, it's about creating an experience. And that leaves us with one last question for you to chew on. Are you learning just to consume, or are you ready to learn in a way that creates an experience your brain will never, ever forget?
You know that feeling, right? You finish an amazing book, you're all fired up, but then a week later, all you've got is this vague vibe of what it was about. The ideas were brilliant, you know that, but you can't for the life of you explain them to anyone. Well, today we are going to fix that. We're diving into a scientifically backed way to make what you read actually stick.
So, why does this keep happening? It is so incredibly frustrating to spend hours reading something that feels life-changing only to have the details just vanish. It feels like a total waste of time, and you're right back where you started.
But here's the thing, and this is really important. It is not your fault. This has nothing to do with being lazy or not being smart enough. The real problem is a deep biological mismatch between how our brains are literally wired to learn and the way we try to cram information into them today.
Okay, let's get into the heart of it. We're going to call this the curse of words. This idea explains why just reading plain old text is one of the least effective ways for your brain to hang on to information. Think about it. For almost all of human history, we didn't learn from books. We learned from doing. We remembered the path to the water, which berries were poisonous, who was a friend and who was a threat. Our brains are survival machines, hardwired for movement, emotion, and understanding our place in the world. Written language, that's a super recent invention, and our ancient brains often just see all those abstract symbols as, well, noise. That is, unless we do the work to translate them.
So, if text is like a foreign language to our brain, what's its mother tongue? To create memories that actually last, we have to stop yelling at our brains in a language they don't get. We have to start speaking the language they were built for.
And this is where that mismatch just becomes so obvious. Our brain is craving movement and action, but we're giving it flat, static pages. It's designed to remember things with an emotional kick, things that are dangerous or rewarding, but we feed it these neutral, abstract ideas. It's a master of navigating space, but we try to just use brute force repetition. It's like trying to put diesel in a gasoline engine. It just doesn't work.
And this brings us to a key player here, the hippocampus. We think of it as the brain's memory center, which it is, but it didn't evolve to remember facts for a test. It evolved to be a GPS. It's a spatial navigation system. That's exactly why you can remember the layout of your friend's house you visited one time years ago, but you forget a key fact you read 5 minutes ago.
And there's cool science to back this up called dual coding theory from psychologist Alan Pavio. Think of your brain having two separate channels for memory, one for words and one for images. When you just read, you're only using that one verbal channel. But the moment you create a picture in your mind to go with the words, you open up the second channel. Now you have two different ways to find that memory later. You've literally doubled your chances of remembering it.
So, the trick, the big secret, is turning abstract ideas into concrete scenes. Your brain doesn't think in definitions, it thinks in characters and stories. Scientists have even found celebrity neurons that fire only for a specific person. So the abstract idea of inflation is super forgettable. But what about a goofy image of a giant balloon floating over and snatching food right off your dinner table? Now that is something your brain can grab onto.
Okay, so theory is great, but how do we actually do this? How do we become these expert translators for our own minds? Well, let's walk through a really simple 4-step method to encode information the way your brain wants to.
All right, step 1, pull out the main idea. Just one simple sentence. Step 2, create a mental movie. Don't just make a static picture, make it move. Step 3, tag it with an emotion. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Even a little surprise or humor works wonders. And finally, step 4, anchor it in space. Imagine the cause of something is on your left and the effect is on your right. You're now using your brain's built-in GPS to organize the idea. And here's a great way to check if you've really got it. You can call it the visual Feynman technique. See, it's easy to trick yourself with words, but if you try to draw the idea, even with just simple stick figures and arrows, you can't hide. If the drawing doesn't make sense, it's a sure sign your understanding of it is still a little shaky.
And what's really wild is that this isn't some newfangled life hack. The most brilliant people in history figured this out on their own way before we had brain scans to prove it.
So, get this. About 2,500 years ago, a Greek poet named Simonides was at a big dinner party when the roof of the hall collapsed. He was the only one who made it out. The bodies were completely unrecognizable. But Simonides, he was able to identify every single person there. Not by their face, but by creating a mental map of where each person had been sitting. In that awful moment, he stumbled upon a profound truth. Our memory is fundamentally spatial.
This discovery became what we now call the method of loci, or a memory palace. And you see this same pattern over and over again. Leonardo da Vinci, he learned by sketching everything. Albert Einstein famously said he didn't think in words at all, but in pictures and feelings. They all knew intuitively that true learning isn't about memorizing words, it's about encoding an experience.
Okay, so how does all this ancient wisdom apply to our crazy modern world, with AI everywhere and nobody getting enough sleep? Let's talk about two huge factors.
AI can be an incredible tool, but for memory, it's also a bit dangerous because it lets you skip the hard work of encoding. If you just ask it for a summary, you've outsourced the very process that builds memory. So here's the smart way to use it. Do the visualization work first. Then ask AI to help you come up with even better metaphors, or use it to challenge the mental model you've already built.
And then there's sleep. Honestly, this one is completely non-negotiable. All that amazing visual encoding work you do during the day gets locked in during deep sleep. Staying up all night to cram might feel productive, but it's like painting a masterpiece on your computer and then just yanking the cord out of the wall without hitting save. It's all gone.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Your brain isn't failing you. It's not broken. You've just been trying to talk to it in a foreign language, the language of abstract text. The solution is to become fluent in its native tongue again, the language of images, space, and emotion.
So the next time you read something you really want to remember, don't just reach for the highlighter. Translate it. Turn that boring sentence into a movie in your head. So what's the one idea you're going to turn from just words into a real, lasting experience today?